My name's Jay Alvaro. I go to Duke Divinity School, so I've got one more year left in the MDiv program there. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, but my wife and kid and I went up to Duke to do graduate studies. So yeah, and I just kind of ran into the preaching academy. Like it just kind of fell in my lap when I was upstairs one day and saw y'all's poster, and it was provocative enough for me to call the number on it. So that's how I got tied into everything. In undergrad, I did studio art at a college in Louisiana, and so my assumption was that I was going to teach in that profession. So I'd go get an MFA and teach in some way, and that just wasn't in the cards. And so I'd been moving away from seminary ever since I went into college, because I grew up on a seminary, and my wife's dad worked at a seminary, and my dad worked at a seminary, so it was really not something I wanted to do. But as things happen, you tend to do those kind of things, or you feel called. And so we went to seminary. My wife wasn't surprised at all. Had been for a while praying for me, and so I kind of let go of some of those other things I wanted to do. But what happened with preaching for me is that the studio art degree, that kind of way of thinking, the sermon became a moment when the art side, maybe the right brain part of me, had a way to interact with theology and then to communicate that theology back to the congregation. And so when I think of preaching, I don't think in highly structured, systematic terms. For me, is a much more free medium. So I'm listening a lot to poets and to musicians and how they are communicating, and then hoping to bring some of that into preaching. For me, the thing that stood out the most, and this was my first time being in any kind of gathering where people were preaching just round the clock, back and forth. And I've heard a lot of white males preach before, and so that's just something you see a lot of. And so probably the thing that stuck up to me the most at the academy, at the festival, was just the diversity that was there. Yeah, so getting to hear women preachers and hear that perspective for me was really helpful. Same thing with African American preachers, because we just, in the church that can tend to be isolated, it is, and kind of hermetically sealed, it's really nice to break out of that. And the festival is, I think, trying to be that kind of experience, and it worked for me when I was there. I have a 3-year-old at home and a pregnant wife, and so I really didn't want to leave the house at all, and much less come with, this is 9 hours away from Durham for me. So I did my first sermon, and it was draining for me. But so I've got a coach here, a mentor, his name's Tommy, and we sat down and talked about it a little bit, and then the vocals coach sat down and talked to me, and all of a sudden I realized that I had a ton that I needed to learn while I was here. I just assumed that I would get here and preach 4 times and then go home. And they're 8-minute sermons, so it can't be that hard because I've preached before. But the experience of first preaching to a bunch of future preachers, and then also just the rigorous nature of preparing that quickly over and over again. Like anything else, it just kind of starts to stretch you. And in some ways, it'll break you, but in ways you were already weak before, and potentially there was fissures before you came. So me seeing those here, but then also to see them, but be surrounded by people who will nurture me kind of back to being whole in certain ways, has been really helpful. And when you're in a church setting and those things happen, you're just kind of by yourself. And so that's been for me really beneficial and surprising, since I came in some ways kind of wishing I was somewhere else for a little bit. And now, 2 days in, I'm really looking forward to seeing what the last day of the week looks like. Draw for me, and when I talk to people, the draw is that when they show up, they start to create the identity of what the academy is. And so we need them there more than necessarily they need to be there for the academy. And that, I guess that's probably what I would tell them. The other stuff, you haven't yet seen what the network's going to look like in terms of who we're getting to meet. In 10 years, what these preachers are going to look like and where they're going to be. And I try and keep that stuff farther in the back of my head in terms of this way to quantify the value that seems to me like a dangerous way to think about preaching and friendship. And so I want to avoid that kind of articulation. Community is a word I would maybe prefer to use. I think about like Bonhoeffer's thoughts on how to create a community that sustains one another, and I think that preaching's really hard, and preachers are lonely most of the time once you get into the parish. And so that's how Bonhoeffer talks about seminary, that experience, right? That this is the gift of time we have together before we enter what's going to feel like the wilderness in a lot of ways. And it is, it's a blessing that shouldn't be missed, I think. So one of the things I hope that the Academy can do is break open some categories. So the benefit of having young preachers is they aren't yet potentially, their imagination isn't yet captured by some kind of program or some kind of form. And preaching desperately needs to be freed in a lot of ways from some of these captivities. And I think that young people who are courageous and creative have the potential to do that. And I want those people to show up and do that. And I think that the Academy is a place that's providing them a pulpit, people to listen and support them, and support to do so. And so hopefully the Academy is, this early on, will start to figure out ways to dialogue back with the church at large and homiletics, institutions at large, in ways that that could potentially break some cycles and create momentum and movement that I think is needed right now.